I'm Lara.
Hello, Lara.
Hi, your daughter, and my daughter is sitting there, your granddaughter, Tabitha. And so, today we thought that it would be nice to interview you and ask you some questions
Okay.
as though we're on Desert Island Discs. So I'm going to ask you some of your music choices through your life and how they have impacted you and at different stages, you know, why you've chosen these songs and what they mean to you.
All right.
Okay, so shall we start off with your sort of earliest memories and your first song?
Yes.
What song have you chosen for us?
Well, my first music that really impressed me was Dvorak's New World Symphony. Used to play that on the 78 turntable, and I loved it. I loved the fact of the Negro spirituals and the New World in America. It was beautiful. That was in the house in Great Crosby, which is a suburb of Liverpool on the Mersey. That's where I lived with my grandparents.
I'll take it from this side of the camera. And so tell us a little bit about your life.
Born in 1940 during an air raid, and I was born in a nursing home surrounded by nuns in a place called Waterloo. I remember how it was. We used to go down to, at the end of the road, we lived in a place called Cambridge Road, and there was a Chinese laundry where the men, the Chinese, and he had pigtails, and they used to starch his collars.
Your grandfather's?
Yeah, my grandfather's. My father wasn't around much because it was during the war, and he was stationed somewhere. He was in the Air Force on the ground because he couldn't fly because of his eyes. But he came back sometimes, and once he came back, and in his kit bag was something really rather exciting. It was a puppy. It was a little, I think it was a border collie. And I loved it very much, but we didn't keep it, so it went somewhere else, which is a shame. But I did love it, and my mother lived there as well at the time, and she loved the fire. It was winter time. She loved the fire, and one night I heard her screaming, and her nightdress had caught fire because it was a gas fire with those sort of pipe things, and her dress had caught fire, and Dad had got her, was rolling her in blankets, and she was screaming. It was terribly scary. Anyway, but she seemed all right in the end. And you know, we used to, every night we'd have to shut down the place. The windows were all blacked out, so the lights couldn't be seen outside, and then the planes would come over and bomb the place, the German planes, every night, because you'd hear the air raid warning, like that, and that was happened, and yeah. And there weren't many cars. We did have a car which was in the garage, but it was not being used because I guess there was no petrol around. But things were brought, like coal, big bags of coal were brought by draft horses in a big wagon, and they'd pull them and drop them off into different houses. And there was a farm down the bottom of the road called Wright's Pit Farm, and it had a pond and ducks, and there was a little shop, and you'd go and buy fresh vegetables there. It's not there anymore. When I went back, it's all disappeared, houses and stuff. But yeah, so it was sort of interesting, and I'd go down the later on when I had a bicycle, and I was given a shilling if I could ride on my own, and I did it, and I was given a shilling back from my one of my uncles. My mother had two brothers, and they sort of said, yeah, we'll give you a shilling if you can ride this, and I did. And yeah, and not far away was a village, the main village, the shopping, where there were shops and sort of place where you buy cheese and cut meats and that sort of thing. We wouldn't call it a delicatessen, it was before they existed. At night, we'd have to go into this metal, this shape, well, with my mother and my father, I think, if he was there, and it was in the kitchen, and it was bolted to the floor, and it was just called the Anderson shelter. And I had a gas mask. I think it was a Mickey Mouse or a Donald Duck one. I'm not sure which, just in case. And that's where we spent the night. And my grandparents went out in a sort of shed in the backyard where they slept. Pretty basic, I tell you, when I looked at it again. And there was a big explosion one night, and next morning the house that was over there was just a big hole. It wasn't there anymore. It was a direct hit by a bomb. Really sad. And our house, from the blast, got a huge crack all the way down it. And it's still there. And I went back years ago with Alan Rooney. We went because I wanted to get some soil from the garden, which helps you with your childhood. And the old guy came to the door. What do you want? How much soil do you want? I thought, I don't know, just a little bit. Imagine the sort of backhoe or something. And I said, oh, by the way, I see you've still got the crack. I remember when that happened. He didn't like that. Anyway. Is this the sort of thing you want?
Yeah, great memories, thank you. And so this was around, you were about...
Four, 5.
So then
4.
This was just before you went to prep school?
Yeah, I didn't go to prep school till I was 6 and a bit, 6 and a half or something like that.
Okay, so we'll play your song.
Some years later, and the song I've chosen is from Glenn Miller, because my dad used to dance to Glenn Miller, the Glenn Miller band, where he was playing in England sometimes, Oxford and around. And we had a lot of his records at home, and I used to play them. And one of my favourites was Pennsylvania 65000. So that reminds me a lot of my father, and he was telling me what he used to do, and he also, then he was sort of home for quite a bit until he went off to work. And my grandfather at the time was reminiscing about the war, and he showed me this wooden truncheon, policeman's truncheon. And he said he used to go out at night and check that the streets were okay. And I said, well, was anyone around? He said, well, I once caught a sailor climbing into a girl's bedroom, he said. Did you do something about it? Well, I cautioned him. Anyway, that was my grandfather. So my mother had left by then. I don't know if the New World Symphony had something to do with America and my stepfather, who he became when she married him, but I don't know. But he was a lovely man. He used to drive me around in his Jeep, and he was a cavalry officer, which meant he was in the tanks, I think, but he was cavalry, and he had a horse which could stand on its back legs, he told me. And he had one of those long swords like General Custer had, or all that sort of thing. He had all that. He told me. I never saw it because it was obviously in America. But anyway, he was lovely, and he used to bring us food, because things like tinned peaches and pineapples, we just couldn't get them, or jams. He used to bring all this food for us, because the Americans had everything, of course. And yeah, and then my mother left, and yeah, that's it really.
You don't want to talk more about that?
I don't know why we can ask me questions, you see, it's very hard. You've got to ask me.
You told me the other day about a cowboy outfit.
Oh yeah, when my mother got to America, she wrote me a lot, and she had lots of photographs, and she sent me photographs of Louisa Gay and Buddy, who was actually, well, he was called Buddy. All the little boys were called Buddy in those days. Still are probably. And she sent me this cowboy outfit, because that's what I really wanted, was a cowboy outfit. And I had the whole thing, you know, the shirt, the button snap button shirt, the hat, the belt, the holster with the two guns, and the chaps with the sort of you know,
Yeah.
frills on the side and all that sort of thing. Everything but the boots. And I made she said, well, I'll send you boots, and just let me have your foot size. So my grandma and I drew it out on the floor and sent it to her, but I never got the boots. Don't know, maybe they got lost, who knows. But anyway, when I went to school, I was quite sort of popular, because I had, guns and cowboy outfits and all that sort of thing.
Very cool.
So that was that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for those memories. And so your next sort of chapter of your life is either when you went off to prep school?
Yes, just around that time. And some of the music I was playing at home is this one, called 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford.
Some people say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood. Muscle and blood and skin and bones. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
Love it. Okay, so next you're in the Lake District?
Yes.
Whereabouts?
Went away to school, a place called Arnside, which is on the Kent Estuary, which had a mighty bore, which is because it comes in from Morecambe Bay, and it's very narrow, and the water pushes and it rises up a huge wall of water just pouring across the sands, and there's a big viaduct where the trains would go across to Bower-in-Furness across the other side, and it was quite something, particularly in the spring. It would come all over the sea wall. There were houses along the front, and then the school was at the end of the little front, in a park, a lovely old house with a lovely orangery in the front, and lots of woods and trees and steps coming down, playing field. And there was a swimming pool. Everything there. It was wonderful. Even a little railway track up in the woods, and we used to build tree houses up there as well. We had a great time. And there was a stockade for wood, where I saw the albino blackbird. It was completely white. It was very strange. I'm fascinated by that. And I'd go off with the headmaster, because I was really interested in birds. We go bird watching, and he knew a lot about them. We used to go in his boat, a boat called Kittiwake, and we used to go across to the marshes and look at birds and nesting birds. And that was where they they farmed or harvested the turf for bowling greens. It had particularly fine grass, and they rolled it up. They'd cut it, roll it up, and then take it wherever it was needed and put it down for bowling greens. That came from there. And it obviously, the Vikings were there because of the name Arnside, that's Danish. And just out of the village, there was this tower, just a single tower, and a farm below it. And this, if raids were coming, people would light a fire in the olden times, 1,000 years ago or whatever, more. And light a fire to warn, and all across the whole of the land would be the fires, and people would go inside, hide, and that sort of thing when the Danes were coming. I suppose it was the Danes. I imagine it would have been, yes, the Vikings anyway. And yeah, it had a lot of history like that. It was an amazing place. So you had the tide, which I got stuck once with my friend Bill. We went down there after fireworks day, I think, and tried to pick up old rockets and things which had gone onto the beach. And I got one of my gumboots stuck into it was all quicksand. You had to be very careful, and I heard the roar of the tide coming in. They didn't have bells in those days. They do now apparently, but coming in, and we were scared. We've got to go quickly, hurry up. And then we had little dormitories. There were two houses where we all lived, about 60 boys. And in our dormitory, I used to read to them at night, Famous Five, or Biggles, or those sort of stories. Or one of the boys would, in the darkness, he would tell a movie he'd seen. Perhaps something like, what's that one with Alan Ladd? Oh, I forget what you call it. Shane, I think it was, or something like that. He'd tell the story, the Western. Of course, we love Westerns and everything. And I had a torch, and I used to read them chapters each night. There was about 4 of us in a room, that was about it. That was fun. It was very cold. We didn't have anything like duvets or duvets, as they say in England, but we didn't have any. We just had a sheet and a thin blanket and a very thin piece of cloth on the top, and it was bloody cold.
Like woolen blankets, or no?
No.
Gosh.
Yeah, it was really tough. Selectors, the north is tough, and it was. I remember breaking the ice to get the water for washing in the morning or something like that. It was fairly but Matron we all loved Matron, and she looked out, and she used to bath us and look after us, and we all loved Matron. She was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a lot of memories from there, and I think they've influenced your life quite a lot.
It was very, very important to me, and one of the teachers, Mr. Wright, I wrote a poem about him, Mr. Wright of Arnside. I wrote this poem. Yeah, one more thing I want to mention, that with a friend, we were put in charge of the little school library, and because one of the popular books or authors there was Captain W. Johns, who wrote Biggles. And so the friend and I, we wrote him a letter, and we got a reply, and two of his books, his latest one and another one, which we hadn't got. And he said he was really happy that we're reading his books, and that was really nice.
That's very cool. Did you keep the book?
Well, they're in the library. Whatever happened to that? School's not there. Yeah, so that was that. Anyway, so yeah. I didn't get enough passes in my leaving exam to go to Radley, so I failed on points there, I suppose, in my father's school. So they found a place for me at a place called Eastbourne College, which was down south in Sussex. And they were keen to have me because at my school, my prep school, I was captain of cricket. I got the Victor Ludorum, which is the all-round sports cup. And so because they were the house I went to, Gonville House, which is a sports house at Eastbourne, they were keen to have me. And that was that, really. So I came down south. My grandfather had died by then.
Do you think that if it was around the same time that you were about to go to public school, right? Do you think that that affected you and affected your entrance exam at the time?
I think so. That's what the headmaster thought. He thought he couldn't understand it, but he thought that might be something to do with it. I wasn't. I was quite disturbed, I think. I don't really know. Because, you just take the exam and everything sort of happens, But, yeah. Yes,
because Grandpa, your father, my grandfather, went to Radley. Do you think that there was quite a bit of pressure on you to go there as well?
Well, they would have liked me to go. I never felt any pressure from my grandparents. Just whatever he does, it's fine. We're okay with it. Yeah, they were lovely.
Can you describe them a bit more to me?
My grandmother was, she was a strong woman, and she smoked like a lot of people did then, and
a keen golfer.
She was a very keen golfer. She actually came to the All England finals in golf of the women's championships, and she didn't win, but she came second. And my grandfather was also a good golfer. He was a solicitor in Liverpool, and continuing with his father, who was also a solicitor. Liverpool then was a very vibrant, it was the second city of Britain, and it was the place where the sugar used to come in, the sugar cane. Tate and Lyle's were there, and the cotton, it had a big cotton exchange, and that was one of the big industries, apart from shipbuilding and stuff. And the Cunard was based there, so as a child I would often see the Queen Mary liner, or the Queen Elizabeth later, going up the Mersey, pulled by 6 tugs to beyond the bar, and then it would be out and heading off for New York. So it was quite exciting seeing that. It's very, very, the Mersey is very wide, very big river in Liverpool. But we were in this part which was near the sandhills, near Blundell Sands, and we would, if you went down, you could see it, see the ships leaving for New York. So it was quite exciting. So it was a very vibrant city then. But then the cotton market crashed. I think Gandhi came to Britain, and everybody loved him. And he said, we want to make our own cotton. And it crashed. I remember when it crashed. One of my, I think he was a, like Dickinson, he was a, to you.
Godfather.
Yeah, he was a godfather. My mother chose him because he was very wealthy. Harry Dodd. But he wasn't very wealthy after that. Yeah.
And do you think that affected Johnson Brothers as well, which ended up being Johnson Dry Cleaners?
Well, they were dry cleaners anyway, and they bought pullers and different ones. No, I don't think so, because, I
suppose they weren't dealing with cloth.
No, they weren't dealing with
regardless of where they were made.
If the cloth came from Yorkshire, that was fine. The wool came from Yorkshire. It doesn't matter. It was the cotton that was Liverpool was, because it was a port. to the Americas. Yeah. So I went to this large school in Sussex, south of England.
And
I did not like it. I hated it, and I had horrors of the place. And I was teased a lot because I had an accent. But I gradually created friends, as one does. You know, it takes time. But it was wasn't. I didn't enjoy it.
you do have some fond memories that you've shared from there of, you know, being a teenager and sneaking out. And
sneaking
that kind
out
of
at night with a friend, from another house, and going meeting girls down at the coffee bar. That was fun. We were never caught, because Eastbourne was Eastbourne, but there were certain areas of Eastbourne which were out of bounds to us.
Why?
I've no idea why, because maybe there was some sort of shops we shouldn't go to or something like that, but I don't know. I never discovered it. I mean, I never went back to have a look either. So we put our caps in our pockets, and we presumed we'd look like anyone else. Obviously we stood out a mile anyway, but we still went down into these in out of bounds. And I remember going, this was in bounds with a friend. We went down to the, this is a song now, we went down to a record store, and they just got in this album, Elvis Presley, which is, and we asked him if we could listen to some of it, and he played some of it. And one of those, there was Heartbreak Hotel was one of the ones there, which became very famous, of course. The whole album became very famous. And the one I really liked was Mystery Train.
Should we play it now?
Yeah, let's play it.
Right. 16 coastline. Well, that long black train got my baby and go.
So I saw that this song, I believe, came out in 1955.
Yes.
So is that where we are, sort of in your
I'm 15,
timeline?
I'm 15 now at Eastbourne. Had a friend called Stuart Cunnell. Was into Buddy Holly, and he had his hair styled exactly like Buddy Holly. Went to this hairdresser, and we all did. I went with a friend to have our hair done with the duck's arse at the back, and like the Everly Brothers and that sort of thing. We did all that, and we managed to get hold of very tight black jeans, and we would wear those sometimes. Of course, it wasn't school uniform, of course. That was the first year I was there. It was very cold winter, and this American guy called Wyckoff, tough guy, and I was the 3/4 in the rugby field, and he went smashing into me and fractured my leg. So I was in plaster for the rest of that time, and it's given me the jip ever since, really, that leg. So never mind. That's probably what they call it, karma from the past summer. Anyway, so yeah, that was that. And when I was getting older there, of course there were prefects. You had to do jobs, so they had to clean their army boots, make them all shiny, and it was called fagging. You had to do this, fag. You have to come and do this and do that, and that was in the first year or two. And then, a friend of when I was much older, a friend of mine, Nobby Clark. All Clarks are called Nobby Clark for some reason. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. Hugo would probably verify that. And he would sort of let us go places and go with us and not tell anybody. It was great. It was so. But anyway, I left school as soon as I could. But one good thing, the headmaster, who just come from Eton, he'd been headmaster at Eton, Michael Burley, he was not very nice to me. I don't know why. maybe he'd heard things about me, but he was a bit down on me. But on the other hand, when I mentioned I was interested in Dylan Thomas, he said, "Oh, you can borrow these two LPs, long playing records," and there was a little room we used to play music in called a rhythm room or something. I forget. I think we called it that. And yeah, he lent us those. So it was really kind of him. And of course, Dylan Thomas, I loved his poetry and always had ever since. Loved his work because he was what I call a bard, a true bard, wonderful voice. I know he drank himself to death, but anyway.
Is there a particular
poem?
Yeah.
Fern Hill, for example. When I was young and easy under the apple boughs about the lilting house, and happy as the grass was green.
It's lovely. So, from Eastbourne, you went to London?
I went to London, yeah. I was living with my father in Essex at a place on the Central Line out towards Epping called Loughton, which was a suburb, but it was quite, it was a little bit upmarket then.
Was that around the time he had his nice car?
No, he got rid of that by then. No.
What was it?
A Lagonda, sports, open.
I remember seeing a picture of it.
Two-seater.
Smart.
Yeah, so I think he got a Simca after that, or one of those Spanish ones. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, so it was near Epping Forest, which is an interesting forest. So that was it, and I created friends. We used to go to this place of a weekend up on the hill, take the bus up the hill to a place called Woodford, and there was a coffee bar there, because they were all the rage then, coffee bars. It was next to a garage, I think, coffee bar, and all the young people, all of us used to meet and hang out and that sort of thing. And yeah.
So your next song you've chosen on the list is Miles Davis, Kinda Blue?
Yes, well then I was 17, 18, 19. I would go off to London often, and there were two jazz clubs I used to frequent. I loved jazz, and one was called the Flamingo, and the other was the famous Ronnie Scott's, which was in an old reconditioned taxi rank house. It was damp. It was a real dive. It's not like the one we went to, but it was great. And I'd listen to Tubby Hayes and a blind pianist who came in with his dog, and Ronnie Scott himself playing on the saxophone. I just loved it. And I had a girlfriend who I took out one Saturday, took her up on the bus to London and took her to hear Sarah Vaughan sing at Ronnie Scott's. She was lovely. She was blonde and she was really sweet. I can't remember her name now, but she was really sweet.
I feel like this song also is very, it's like one of the soundtracks of my childhood.
Yes, I'm sure. I bought the album 3 times.
So good.
So that was a lot of my teen time, and there was something else. I used to spend a lot of time with my father. We used to go up to London, and we once went to the hall on the South Bank. We heard the Modern Jazz Quartet, these wonderful musicians. We had a wonderful evening, and we'd often go to the National Film Theatre, which was under the bridge. It was sort of tucked away, and every week we probably went. There was a Renoir festival maybe, or a South American film festival. We used to go a lot. It was great fun. I loved it.
So did he love films then a lot as well?
He did. Oh, he did. He loved films and jazz. Yes, he did. So they were happy times. And then I decided, I had a friend who lived in London called Justin. He was, he'd spent a year or two in Boston, or near Boston, and he had this American accent. I mean, he was English as anyone else, but he just loved America, and he had this strong American accent, and he became an architect. His father was an architect, but I think he went off to America. I lost touch with him. I tried to find him, but so Justin and I moved out. I moved out, and he was quite happy because he was studying to be an architect, and so we found a flat in Chelsea, and we lived there a while until I met Hermione, and the rest is history.
And you were working then?
Then I was working. I'd been working in the Standard Bank of South Africa. I left there, and I joined an architect's office for a short time because I thought I might be interested in architecture. And then I wrote to the BBC and said, "I hear you've got some jobs free." And they wrote back and said, "Yes, we have. Come and see us." So I went up to Portland Place, Steam Radio, broadcasting house, which is just round the corner from where Merlin had his restaurant. And I worked in the Recorded Programs Library for a year, and then I transferred across to Ealing Film Studios, and I worked in the library there for a year, and then I was trained to become a film editor. So I was there at BBC 3 or 4 years. I met Hermione, who became my wife. We fell in love. She came from North Devon, an old aristocratic family, and North Devon, fell in love with North Devon. It was sort of wild compared to the southern part. I loved it. And I used to go down often a weekend. I had a friend called Carol Lilly and John Batten, who his parents lived in Tiverton. And so we used to, she had a little sports car, a little MG Sprite, I think it was, or something. She was the heiress to the Lillian Skinner shoe people, just by the by. But she was a sweetheart, Carol, and she's quite happily used to drive us down to Instow, where Hermione was staying with her parents and her young sister, Cherry, and her brother. And it was lovely, and we spent a lot of time down there, weekends, and then I caught up with her in London, and I think we fell in love. It was simply that, really. We were very much in love. She was very beautiful, very lovely, and we married when I was 21. We got married on a very windy day on top of a hill, a church on top of a hill, and very soon a son was born to us, Nicholas Patrick. And a couple of years later, Tristan Alexander was born. And we were living, before the children came, we were living in Notting Hill, which was very rough then. It was very poor. If you might have heard of Rackman, he had a lot of houses, and he used to get the rent out of people and do nothing to them, and it was a racket. And we lived in a very damp basement underneath a young woman and her husband. She was an editor film editor in the BBC. I think that's how I found the flat. We lived there for a while, and we used to go down to Portobello Road, and we bought our bed there. We brought it back on a sort of little cart, and we had a lovely time. It was good. It was good times. But Portobello Road was really exciting on a Saturday. all the different stalls and people. So we had it. But then her aunt, who was a very wealthy lady, lived in Belgravia. She had a mews cottage, which an elderly couple were in, and she managed to terminate their lease and invited us to go in, and we lived there. And it was in a small mews around the back of Wilton Crescent, so it was Wilton Mews. And at the end of it was the famous pub, the Grenadier, which, because in that area, around the back of Hyde Park Corner, was where Wellington's troops were billeted in the 1800s and so on and so forth. And so had a big army connection there. The house, we were number 8, I think, and number 5, I think it was, or number 6, was owned by Lady Jane Willoughby, and she rented it out. She had a butler, and she rented it out with the butler. And the first the first person who rented it was Rudolf Nureyev, the Russian ballet dancer who in Paris jumped the barriers to become free and to join his boyfriend, his Danish boyfriend, I think, who was waiting for him on the other side. But it's quite a dramatic thing. And anyway, he came and lived there, and he danced at the Covent Garden. I saw him a number of times dancing with Margot Fontaine, and you know, he was quite the one in London. Everyone wanted to see him and watch him. He was brilliant, God. And I used to see him driving in his little Mercedes Sports. And then he moved on. I don't know where he went, but then lo and behold, who came and rented the place after him was the Rolling Stones. I didn't sort of get to talk to them, but I did see them occasionally, sort of moving out and going off down the road. It had a barrier. There was a man in a little box and a sentry box who lifted up the barrier, in or out of it. You know, it was all very, very special. And there were a couple of people down there. Was that famous actor who lived down the end, and opposite me was this lovely guy called Tutti Lemko, who was also an actor, and I think he was Finnish or Scandinavian, but he was lovely, and he had a wife, and I became very friendly with him, and he was a lovely guy. Mm. Yeah, so that was that really, and
also Lake Como became quite special.
Yes. Hermione's aunt had been a governess to Dina D'Amico, the Marchesa de D'Amico, whose husband was a Sicilian marquis. I never met him. I think he died by then, but Dina had a wonderful house in Milan, 1200, 1300, and she had these two little paintings about so big called by Guardi, who was, well, I don't want to say Canaletto was like him, but Guardi was really special, and it was about that big, and she used to carry them everywhere she went. And she had a house on Lake Como, which her father, he lived in. He had a separate house to the Villa Pizzo, and he'd been a boat builder on Lake Como, and all the boats, the rowboats and things you would see there at the time had been built by him. And he was a lovely man, and I spent a lot of time with him. And but I spent a couple of times, Hermione and I went down there and stayed at Villa Pizzo, and it was just remarkable. The ceiling was so Italian. Everywhere the walls were painted, and they had beautiful murals, and my ceiling was painted by Tiepolo, who was a famous artist. And she had wonderful antiques, and we used to go out to lunch to another villa called Pliniana, which was built by the Roman Pliny, going way back to Roman times, and his son. And it had a well in the middle of it, which rose and fell with the time of the, I don't know why, with the time of the day or something. It was very famous. And the woman who lived there, the lady who lived there, was called Marchesa Borghese. And she had a husband, but he died. But she used to travel around Europe with him in the coffin. And someone said that she once left him in an inn. And she was a character, and she was known to jump out of her balcony into Lake Como, just for the hell of it. She was a character, I must say. And the servants all had this wonderful white jackets with brass buttons and all the insignia of the Marchesa, and all the knives and all the cutlery. It was just exquisite stuff. I mean, wow.
Sounds pretty special.
Yeah, it was. And then across the way was old Duke Visconti, who was, I think, the uncle of Luchino Visconti, the famous Italian film director of Milan. But I never saw him. But there were cattle there in the house. It was sort of there. It was back, and it was sort of looked a bit deserted. So I don't suppose he used it much. But there's some interesting characters, and Dina would take us off to lunch and off to Switzerland, which is quite close by, or she'd take us down. She'd go to Revasi's. She said, "You need a tie," and she bought me 3 or 4 ties, really beautiful Italian ties in Como, and she was really lovely. She said, she was very, very sort of slightly guttural in a way. And she said, because they came from Sicily, if you don't pay them, your cattle will die, so we pay them. That's the way it was. And so Fanino was her husband. But as I say, I never met him. But yeah, I had some lovely times there. And as we left, she just handed us a whole bunch of Swiss francs and say, "There you are." And my bank manager was just amazed when I put the money into the bank. He said, "Well, you put in more than you took out." So we were very lucky, and
So around that time, you've got Bob Dylan.
Yeah, Like a Rolling Stone. That's the one. Yeah, that's. So I was very much into Bob Dylan, very much. He was it really then.
Time you dress so fine, do the bumps of dime in your prime. Then people call, say beware doll, you're bound to fall. You thought they were all kidding you. You used to laugh about everybody that was hanging out. Now you don't talk so loud. Now you don't seem so proud.
I worked on a program, was assistant editor with Peter Barber, and we worked on a weekly program called Tomorrow's World, which became very, very well known, very popular. It was science and different things. And one day, a South African guy turned up, and called Malcolm Lyle Watson. He'd been director of Johannesburg Zoo, and he was an interesting character. He later on wrote many books, Supernature and all this, lots of books. He was a really interesting guy, and he was like a reporter for the for the BBC. They had 3 or 4 stringers. And I used to talk to him a bit, and he'd tell me how it was in South Africa and how he'd spent with his wife about a few months in the Seychelles Islands, and he said it was really quite a remarkable place. No airport. It was, you were completely isolated. Ships, boats every 3 months, and he mentioned this treasure hunter he'd come across, and he was fascinated by him and the whole story of the treasure, and so I got really excited, and I got some people on the program interested, perhaps to send a film crew out there. But of course, in the end, they weren't going to send a film crew out for 3 months and probably never see them again.
Yeah, wasn't there a ship only once every
well, that's
6
what I
months?
say. Yeah, 3 months. Yeah, and there was a seaplane which the governor had, which there was an American base there, so they had a seaplane, and the governor could sort of use it, and it used to bring the mail in, but basically that was it. It was isolated. But I was quite excited, and so I thought, well, maybe I should go out there and do some research for you, and they were all very supportive of it, and so I left the BBC and went out there and was there a year and met the treasure hunter and everything, and there's a whole story there. I mean, it would take me a long time to tell it, but there was a treasure, this famous pirate called Labous, the Buzzard Frenchman, who captured this 2 or 3 ships. It was there was this big ship leaving Goa with the Viceroy of India on it, a Viceroy of Goa or India, I forget which, and a very high man in Catholic pope, not a pope but a cardinal or something, and it was loaded with treasure, and it had the big cross of Goa, which is about 8 foot high, with crusted with diamonds and all that. Well, and lots of gold bars, all going back to Lisbon, and they got caught in a storm, and the pirate Labous and his friends captured it, entertained them royally, but kept all the treasure, and it's never been found, even to this day. And
wow.
It's worth millions and millions. And we all reckoned it was cached in the Seychelles Islands somewhere. Yeah. I'm nearly 80, so I tend to forget certain things and get a bit confused with a couple of things, but that's by the by. Anyway, so where now?
So you spent time in the Seychelles, and
then when I came back from the Seychelles, I was there a year nearly. They had their own music. It was sort of a mixture of folk and African. It was sort of, and they danced things called a sega. It was a lovely dance, and it looked like it came from the 16th century or something, the formality of it. It was beautiful. Anyway, so I was there. When I came back from the Seychelles, to cut a long story short, I found myself visiting Emerson College, and that September I enrolled and became a student at Emerson College, which was one of the turning points of my life, I think.
And what were you studying?
Well, I did what was called a foundation year, so we'd have 2 or 3 week blocks of someone would come in and lecture on something, like the morning lesson, the main lesson. And then, so I wasn't studying anything particular, I was just taking in a lot of information on all varied subjects: botany, agriculture, arts, poetry, whatever. And then we'd do some eurythmy in the afternoons twice a week, and a couple of times we had sessions of poetry, and I thought that sounded interesting, and it was recommended you go to it anyway. And I went there, and I couldn't believe it. Here was someone was reciting. We took some poem of Keats, I think it was, and somehow it was. He demonstrated how it was possible, not just reading the poem or saying the poem, but speaking it. So it just left the page. It was like in the air. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I want to follow this up.
So you stayed at Emerson College for how many years?
Only 1 year.
So you did the foundation course,
foundation,
and then that's
and then the second one would have been the education year, where you would study Steiner education, Steiner Ed. But I didn't do that, and I'd heard that the speech school was starting up in London, and so I joined that, and I was at the speech school for 3 years. It wasn't everything that I hoped for, but it was really good. It was very good, but I couldn't get my head round the way they were speaking, and I felt that's not the way it should be done. And so during one, that's when I met an Australian called Graham Dixon, who he'd been working in Sydney, an actor, and he joined the school a bit, but he joined mainly the class, but he couldn't hack it. He was very involved in Michael Chekhov's work, which is great. And so it was one summer I had a girlfriend then, a German girlfriend, and it was she who introduced me to Emerson College. She'd been a student there the year before, and so it was largely due to her that I found it and went there and loved it. And so we were living in London when I was at the speech school, and living together. And it was one summer, there was a youth conference, and I just to a place called Dornach in Switzerland, which was like the headquarters of the Steiner movement, the anthroposophical movement they call it. And I went there with just because I thought it would be really interesting to go there. And there I met some people, well, who were interested in theatre. And they showed us, the Goetheanum people, they showed us some of Steiner's mystery plays. And we saw, I think 1 or 2, and we would watch them, and we thought, my God, it's not acting, it's just speaking, oh, like that sort of thing. And yeah, they had different clothes, they were different characters, but they weren't really acting. We thought to ourselves, this is not surely what Steiner imagined, wanted, surely not. And
sounds a bit weird. It sounds a bit weird.
Well, yeah, it is. So we got together, and Brad Riley, who'd come straight out of Woodstock, the festival Woodstock. He had long hair and beads and painted shoes, and he was great. Brad, I'm still in touch with him, and we sort of said, look, what do you think? And we all felt, no, about 20 of us, this is not acting, it's not speaking, it's not, what is it? It's like a sort of ritual or something. And so we decided that how about we find some teachers. Now, he can act, she's good, why don't we try and see if we can get them to work with us? And we come back maybe for a trial, which we did then in Easter, and we had this session with one speech teacher who was brilliant, very tough, very strong, and then we had another session with a Kiwi actress who played Lucifer for a long time, and she was wild with this hair and used to ride a horse around the Goetheanum as a young woman. Yeah, I love that. And she was great, but she was coming down with, she couldn't walk properly anymore. She had this, had to work with a stick, but she was absolutely brilliant and her speech was excellent. And there was this young actor called Michael Knapp who would teach us the gymnastics and certain speech exercises and certain poems. And so we came back and we did a full year there. We got money from the society in England, supported me. They gave money so we could study there, and it was wonderful. For the first year we had a wonderful time. We did performances, we put them on the small. The Goetheanum has got a huge, great big stage, one of the biggest in Europe, second biggest in Europe, and then there's a smaller stage underneath, which is where we presented our plays and our workings and everything.
And this is in Switzerland?
This is in Switzerland.
It's right on the border.
Oh, yeah, Basel, which is near Basel, which is on the borders of France. Yeah. And then as groups go, you know, it didn't hold together, and a lot of people left, and it broke up. But I stayed on for 2 years. I found a job teaching English in Basel for 50 francs an hour, which was a lot of money then. A lot of money.
Sounds like it.
I know, and I was there for 4 days a week, so it's $200, $200 francs a week. And so I lived with some Danish friends in a house down in Dornach in an old building, which was great. I had my own room, and it was wonderful there. And so I went to private lessons with Sophia, who was this New Zealand woman, teacher, and also with the other teacher, Anna Grund. And it was during that time that a woman came over from Australia, because her father was an actor, and he'd acted with Steiner, and he was a lovely man. He was part Russian, and I used to have lunch with him sometimes, and he was lovely. And Mechthild, she was called Mechthild Harkness, who had married an Australian called Alan Harkness, who started the first independent theatre in Adelaide in Australia. And she came over to see her father, and she gave a couple of demonstrations to us as a group of what she could do. And she played in the mystery plays for a long time, acted in them. And she said, "Don't worry, you don't have to speak like that," she said. And I thought it was great, and it was through her that I said, "Well, I want to come out to Australia and work with you." And she said, "All right, I'll arrange it." And she did. And that's another chapter, really.
So your song from Switzerland is?
Stevie Weishaupt. Well, yeah, that's all troubadour music. It's because when I was in Switzerland, I was given a book by a friend called The Massacre of Montsegur, which was the final the end of the, well, probably one of the Europe's greatest massacre it was the Albigensian Crusade, the crusade from the north and the Pope against the Cathars in the south, and the troubadours and the beautiful land of poetry and music and culture, which should come from Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was Richard Coeur de Lion's mother. And so I was given this book, and I decided I was going to go down and spend a week down in Montsegur, and I did. I had a most extraordinary experience down there. the old castle is just ruins up on the hill, but it was the last fortress really to fall from the Crusader army from the north of France. And that's when France then united south and north, because it's a very rich part of France now, the south.
Like in Labyrinth, Kate Moss's book.
Exactly, that's all what it's about. Yes, so I got information from the Australian consulate in Bern, the capital of Switzerland, and they wanted to see me because wanted to interview me about my passage to Australia. And I'd never heard anything back from Mechtel, but so I went in there not knowing what I was applying for, except that I was going to Australia. And the woman interviewing me said, well, they want you. And so I had to fudge it a bit, and somehow I was there the whole day, and she was getting really irritated with me because sign the bloody form, she said. So lovely Aussie, she was great. And anyway, so I was accepted, that was fine, and I had the money. I had the money to pay for the trip out there. I decided I would, I had to fly to Singapore, and then from Singapore I get a boat which took 6 days to get to Fremantle in Western Australia, and then I was going to take the bus across from Fremantle across to Sydney, which would take me about nearly 3 days, which is what I did. We travelled on the old, it was a Russian boat just before Christmas time on the edge of a cyclone, so it was fairly rough. And you can imagine up in Port Hedland and up there or something. Whoa, yeah, anyway. So, anyway, it was great, and got to Fremantle and stayed a night. I think I stayed a night there, and we got on this bus. It was a Greyhound bus. And we were in the same bus for nearly 3 days, down to the Bight, Adelaide, and up through the Murrumbidgee and all through the orange growing part and gradually to Sydney. But we got sort of bored, and at one stage the driver, one was Aussie, one was English, the drivers, and they said, look, we were travelling along, I don't know where we were exactly, and he said, we got a bit of a problem with the engine here. Could you all please stand up? So we all stood up, and please go into the middle aisle of the bus. We did that, and could you all please jump up and down, please? It would help to get the dust out. So we did this. Thank you, and some of the Australians sort of hang on, But anyway, it was fun. So they were trying to sort of make things funny for us, funny. I remember we stopped one night, I think it was near the Goldfields in Western Australia, and a place called Norseman, I think, or something, and we got out to have some fish and chips in a place, and I couldn't believe it was so warm, and it's like the stars were just there. I could almost touch them, they seemed to be so low. It was just amazing. It was a warm night, and I remember meeting my first Australian, and he looked at me and he went like this. How are you?
You're right.
And I thought, and you know what I thought? When I arrived in Australia, I really thought that I was coming home. I really thought I was coming home. It was quite an extraordinary experience. And so I arrived in Sydney, where Graham met me, and I stayed with him in his place in Sydney. And he took me that evening to meet Mechtel and the whole studio, and that was quite something. I wasn't jet lagged, I was bus lagged if anything, but I was fine. And with a couple of days later, we all, the whole studio and I, and then we came back to Sydney. And I think I said to you, Lara, the other day, we were having a discussion about, well, they were, I wasn't, because I was a newcomer, but they were having a discussion which were the best surfing beaches in Sydney, and everyone said, oh yeah, you know, Maroubra and eastern suburbs and so forth, they're the best. And then Debbie, a young student, piped up and said, no, Northern Beaches, Bilgola, Whale Beach, you know, she was saying all that, and then we were talking, and she sort of said, you know, if you want to, that's where I live, and if you want to come out one day, just let me know, and I'll take you around. And I did that some days later when I got back to Sydney. It's a very, very hot day. I arrived at her house, and she made some sandwiches, and so we took the bus from there up to the top of Palm Beach, and she took me up to we walked up to the lighthouse, and that's where Hans Poulsen many years later lived for a while in one of the cottages.
That's a great spot.
Oh yeah, just by the by. And we had a lovely view. She showed me parts of Palm Beach where she and friends used to swing on a rope and stuff. It was all, you know, hardly anyone there then. And it was really hot, so she said, have a swim. So we came down from the lighthouse to the northern end of Palm Beach where there were no lifesavers, nothing. It was just fairly remote. And within a few minutes, we were both caught up in a rip. And Debbie, that's who it was, had been fasting for about 6 days apparently. She was a bit out of it, I'd say. And she was floating away, and you know, I was drowning. I won't go into that whole drowning because I've told you that many times, but I was going under, and the waves are coming and bang, and I was fighting it, which I know now you shouldn't do, but I'm not, as I say, I'm not a strong swimmer, and I was beginning to help, and I thought, no, this is not right. I'm meant to be doing the speech work, and I, with a great thirst of energy, I put my hand out and said, hey, and within a couple of minutes, a voice said, you all right, mate? A couple of board riders came and they helped me, and I said, look, she's out there, she needs help. And I went out and got Debbie, and then by then the lifesavers who came running down with the oxygen and everything, and they said, do you want oxygen? I said, no, I'm fine, I'm just full of water, but I'm fine. Do you want the helicopter? We can take you to Mona Vale Hospital if you want. And I said, no, I'm okay, thank you. And Debbie, who was a friend of, who had a friend, she phoned up her mother, her friend's mother, and mentioned what had happened, and she came and picked us up. And then we're taken back to her house in a place called Newport, which was a lovely little part of the northern beaches. A little house there overlooking the bay. And then someone else turned up. It was her daughter called Amanda. And that's when I first met Amanda. And apparently her mother, Thea, had called her daughter and said, Amanda, who was in Sydney somewhere with her boyfriend, please come home, I've got a drowned Englishman in the house. And I don't know how many cups of tea I had. I must have had 3 or 4. I really just drank the tea, and I was in a little bed in the side there by the bookcases. I don't know if you know that part. You probably don't. Probably can't remember it. And then Amanda came, and that was the beginning of meeting Amanda, and who I later married.
So for music,
For music,
Do we have anything for that time?
I think we have,
Should we do Dire Straits?
yeah, have the Dire Straits.
Money
Yeah.
for Nothing?
Yeah. It's one of the first music I heard was Dire Straits in Australia. Brilliant, Mark Knopfler. Wow. So, it's Australia, so I joined the studio. I was a teacher there, and I taught voice, and I taught Greek gymnastics, and I taught movement, and it was going really well. It was great. I was there for 2 years teaching, and I did many performances in the Hunter Valley and in the Independent Theatre. I did 1 month of Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood. I was narrator 1 and 2, and we played to packed houses. The Independent Theatre, which was one of Sydney's premier theatres. Yes, one of Sydney's premier theatres, and where Peter Finch was an actor there, and that's where he treaded the boards. You've heard of him, I guess.
Mm.
And yeah, so that was. So, and then I was teaching not only the studio. I was teaching in 4 different schools in the evenings and in the day as well. So I was teaching quite a lot. Just voice, my weird speech exercise, which they all loved. I must say, they did love it, and we had a great time.
So is this before you're married?
I was before and during, really, yes. Well, so I finished with the studio, and I decided that I've always had this dream to start a natural foods business, and I knew these little shop in Portobello Road in England a long time ago, and I always had this thing, I want to do something similar but bigger. And so I started it. I started in the back garden. I had some contacts, I had the food, and it grew into Serious Natural Foods. Serious being the star, which I really liked the star, and also it was one of the first ships that Captain Cook was connected to. I think one of his ships was called Sirius. Or was it the first fleet? I'm not one or the other. Anyway, so I did that, and it was partly because Fiola was born, and then Lara was born, and I wanted to give them the best food I could possibly find. And I created one of the first natural food stores in Australia. There was one in Adelaide, which had started before, but the one that I created in Sydney was one of the first. I had help, I had a lot of support, and it went very well. And we even had a takeaway, and people even in America had heard of it, had heard of the snake burgers, the huge great burgers that I used to make, of soya burgers, tempeh burgers, and other sorts of burgers, all vegetarian. Anyway, so that was that. And then I got a call from a friend who said, are you interested in teaching up in Armadale? Armadale, where's that? Well, it's up on the tablelands north of Sydney, about 500 k's. I said, I don't know, teaching me? Then I thought about it, and I thought, yes, I'd like to try that. So I had a lot of background. I'd read a lot of Steiner lectures, books, etc. And meanwhile, I went to various schools. I went down south to Bowral and all different schools, and I watched in classes, and people came and let me take a class and help me, and it was one of the best trainings I could have. And so, a year later, I went up to I went up to Armadale and took a course in a kindergarten workshop for 2 weeks, so I could see the children who were going to come into my class 1. And so that was it. So I suppose you could say I founded the Armadale Waldorf School, which is still going. It goes up to year 8 now. We only went up to year 6. I taught viola, particularly in my class. I didn't really want to teach my daughter, but there was no way around it, and it seemed to work. And I had a composite class of 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, and so on, and 1 and 6 later on.
At school you were Mr. Labron, but at home you were Dad.
Yes, that's right. At school I was Mr. Labron, and at home I was Dad. And I loved it. It's one of the best times of my life, those 10 years up there, and it was really, really wonderful. I loved the teaching, I loved being with the children, and of course they helped me to give birth, and also my children, because I used to tell them a story at night, and out of that was born what we call the Adventure Children, which then I started to write into a series. I'm not sure if I should still call them the Adventure Children, but I don't know what else to call them, because that's what they are. And so that was that. That was Armadale was there for 10 years. And then Amanda said, I want to study art therapy, and I want to go to England and study art therapy. I have 2 places. I think I'm going to go to Stroud. That seems like a good school. And it was interesting because, in a way, I helped to found that school that Karen Jarman started, because I knew Karen in Dornoch and we studied together, and I used to read to her all about the Celtic myths and everything, and so out of that came the word Hibernia School. And so I suppose you could say I sort of helped to start that school, which Amanda then later joined.
Should we have another song?
Let's have Van Morrison.
Van Morrison.
Yes, please. Bring on Van. Van the man.
Foreign Window.
And this was sent to me by Nicholas, my son, my eldest son. He sent me a cassette with no guru, no teacher.
No guru, no method, no teacher.
No method, no teacher. The whole album, and I loved it.
I saw you from a foreign window, bearing down the suffering road. You were carrying your burden to the palace of the Lord, to the palace of the Lord.
So that's Van Morrison, yeah. It's a very, very special album that I really appreciated. I really loved it, and I listened to it often.
And Van Morrison lived in Bath,
Yes,
which is then next chapter, really.
yeah, England. So we came to England. We didn't see Van Morrison, although we came to live in a place called Nailsworth, which is 40 minutes from Bath, 40 minutes from Bristol. Yeah, so it was difficult coming to England, I must say. One of the first impressions was smoke from fires, from people burning fires. It seemed awfully polluted compared to Australia. Anyway, I had work. I was going to work at Winstones in the high school, and I needed to get some basic training to do that, because I wasn't a high school teacher, I was a primary teacher. But so Amanda went and did her course, and through a friend, through Karen Jarman, who started Hibernia School, we were introduced to Angus Gordon, who had pioneered a college for kids with special needs, special disabilities, and so on and so forth, called Ruskin Mill. And Angus offered me work there, and I suppose I did about 15 years working for Ruskin Mill. It was really, really wonderful work. We were given a house, and we had students in the house living with us, and we needed to look after them and take care of their needs, and so on and so forth. It was difficult for my children, for my daughters living there, I know that, and I thank them for soldiering on. So coming to England, being in England and working with Ruskin Mill, I came across someone who became a great friend of mine, Michael Frosch and his wife Linda, and their daughter Jenny, and Freya, who became a friend of Lara's, and she was they were in the same class at Winstones. And Michael was very much into jazz, and I brought my saxophone with me, my alto saxophone, which I was really trying to learn, and which I'd done a bit of work in Armadale on it, but I wasn't that proficient, but at least I was trying. And so with Michael and I, we used to play jazz together and listen to various jazz musicians and so on. And it was through Michael that I actually became a house parent. He went away for a couple of weeks and said, look, you take over this particular house at Upper Grange, and we'll see how you go, and if it works, well, you're in. And it worked, and I was in, so I became a house parent. That's how I became a house parent. Yeah, the next song is Art Pepper. I was a great fan of Art Pepper's, and I think I introduced Michael to his music, which he really liked it. Paul Andrews knew Art Pepper in his latter days, in Art's latter days. He played with him, I think. And during that time, we went up to London to Pizza Express, and we had a wonderful evening at Pizza Express because Kenny Garrett was playing at this club in Soho, and Miles Davis once said, if you want to know where jazz is going, look to my alto player, and that was Kenny Garrett. And we went and heard him play. It was just amazing. And it was an interesting story because Lara and Freya were in the sidebar there, and they were talking with a guy there or something. And what was it you said, Lara?
We were showing off to say that they said, so what are you doing tonight? And we're like, oh, we're here to see Kenny Garrett. And we were showing off, and then they were like, oh yeah, cool, these American guys. They're like, oh yeah, cool, like, good for you. And then anyway, we were like, oh, anyway, it's starting, we better go and sit down. So we went back to our table with our parents, and we were about, 15 years old or something. And then moments later, the same guys walked out on stage and gave us a wink, and we were dying with humiliation.
So that was that. So there was a lot of this, and often we used to go with Michael and Linda to Bristol to go to the special cinema there to watch movies, and we had a great time. It was great to have met them. They were from Vancouver, and we had a good rapport with them. They were a great family, and we're still good friends. I want to play one of Kenny Garrett's song, Straight Street. Here we go. Oh yes, so during that time I suddenly wanted to go to America, and I wanted to work with the Michael Chekhov Theatre Company, and so I set it up. I went over, they flew me over a couple of times to have interviews at different schools. One school in Silicon Valley, which I really liked, and in the end I ended up being hired at Highland Hall in the Valley. And that was interesting. It was interesting. I did, because I couldn't just work for the Michael Chekhov Theatre Company because they were small and they couldn't pay me very much. So I was working as a class teacher, and that was, I could do that alongside it. So it was an interesting time. I love the teaching, and I had a class of 26 little ankle biters, I called them, and all the parents were either in the were all in the movie business, either as screenwriters, cameramen, actors, you name it, directors. And I used to visit all their homes. They invited me each week. I go to a different home, and there would be this director or this cameraman, and they were lovely people. I had a wonderful time, and there was a young girl called Lisi, and her mother was a well-known singer, and her father was the voiceover for all the trailers you have for movies. For many, many years he did all the trailers. And they had their own recording studio in the home, and she had her own recording studio as well in the home. And this little girl was very, very shy. But I helped her, I think. Well, I know I did, because her mother later told me, you gave her real confidence. You brought her into that class, and she later on became a well-known singer herself, her daughter. Been playing in London a couple of times. Unfortunately, I didn't know about that. I couldn't go and see her, but so I was in touch with her mother much later. And that was wonderful. And I had an assistant who was Argentinian, and they had a lovely house down in Santa Monica, or down in Venice Beach, and I used to go down there the weekends and had a lovely time down there. So that was good. It was difficult at times for me living in America, but I lived in a house which had belonged to Jane Russell. She had a complex there, and it was in the middle of the valley. It was the remnants of a huge, great orange grove. If you've ever seen Chinatown, the movie, well, it's all about the orange groves, and this is where it was set. And there was this little isolated group of houses and condos and places where I lived, and I lived in Jane Russell's actual house, and she had 3 swimming pools, and I even had on my my bathroom or shower screen door in glass was a naked sculpture or cutout of Jane Russell, and often I would quite often getting people knocking on the door and say, here you've got this, could I see that screen door? And I said, yes, of course you can, and everything. And it was really nice. I was walking down 3rd Street in Santa Monica, and suddenly I heard this music coming out of a store, and I went inside and I said, what's that? And they said, oh, it's this and such. It's just been released. So I went off and bought it. And this is one of the songs from it, which this is what I heard. So I came back I spent a year in LA, fascinating place. I suppose I went there because it was on the Pacific coast. I think if I'd gone to New York it would have been better because I love to walk and I couldn't walk in LA. People said, don't do it, you'll get shot or something. I said, really? I like to talk to people and walk around, but said, don't do it. And,
not in the valley. Not in the valley. Not in the
valley, no. And the valley had strange names. There was even a place called, a sort of a suburb called Tarzana. I thought, what is this? And I went up to where, I went to visit where, that was a community up there, round the back of, where they made the movie. Oh gosh, what was that movie? Where Joni Mitchell lived, in a community round. Oh gosh, I forget what it was called now, but it was a really interesting little place. It was like, it was like suddenly you came into a little sort of village almost, or sort of cut off from everywhere else. Fascinating. Yeah, it was wonderful. And I went down sometimes down to the beach, to Malibu Beach, and saw where various actors lived, and Cher's great sort of mansion on the island, and who was that actor in the Hannibal Lecter? Anthony Hopkins. People came up to me sometimes and said, "Hey, were you in that? You were in that show, weren't you?" And I just smiled. Because in LA you can do that. You see, I was with a friend, I was being interviewed for a school in Santa Monica, which I didn't in the end go to. Doesn't matter, but I didn't go. And this woman who was really, really distraught came up to us. And I was well dressed, I had a nice shirt, button-down shirt on. And she was saying she'd been, she couldn't get into her house anymore, and she looked at me and said, "Are you a lawyer?" And I looked at her and said, "Madam, don't you know who I am?" And she said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And quickly and disappeared. And my friend laughed and said, "You can say anything in LA and get away with it." Yeah, it was a bit cruel perhaps, but anyway. Yeah, so that was it, really, LA, and I came back to England, and I went on working at Ruskin Mill. So back in England, one thing I did before I left England at Ruskin Mill, I said, "You guys need a website." And so they said, oh, they didn't know what that was. I said, well, I set it out, I created a basic format for a website, and they said, yeah, well, thank you very much, but I don't think we need one. I went to America. When I came back, they'd got one. So I thought, okay. So when I was given a challenge originally by Angus at Ruskin Mill, I want you to create Run of the Mill, the Termly magazine. Well, I didn't know anything about desktop publishing, but I learned that. Somebody helped me to show me how to do it, and I learned it. And from then on I moved on to web design and did a lot of that. I did quite a lot of websites for various people over the years, and some of them I thought were really good. I worked with 2 different programs. I worked with Dreamweaver to start with, and then I went on to WordPress, which was very simple. It was just becoming very popular. And during that period, I did a couple of stints back in Australia. I did try to do some teaching, some voice work. I did 2 or 3 classes, but at the time, the film industry, the general film industry in Australia was really down. So nobody could give me really any work, and there wasn't any flexibility there. And so I stayed with my daughters in a part of Sydney called Zetland, which used to be part of the old Wolseley factory, where they used to make cars years ago. It was a strange place. And then I came back to England and continued doing some web design. And then finally I left Ruskin Mill, and thanks to Amazon actually, so it was thanks to them that I started to look at something I'd wanted to do all my life. I remember my grandfather saying, "Get on with your literary work," he used to say to me. So I then resurrected my adventure children's stories from the Armadale time, and I learned how to, using Photoshop and such, to make the covers of the books and publish them, and I started to write all sorts of stories, and I'm still doing it. And I love it. I mean, people say, "Are you retired?" I say, not at all. I've never been busier, actually. For me, retirement, sort of, people are retired, looks like with pipe and slippers, not doing anything, sitting around doing nothing. No, I'm very busy. I'm really loving it. So that's it.
And now in current day, we're currently in lockdown at Stedham.
Currently, we're in this really weird lockdown, this strange situation. And I've been in Stedham for probably nearly 9 weeks, I think now. It's incredible. I'm staying in Fiona and Bobby's house, and it's been wonderful. It's been strange being on my own, and I occasionally walk down to the town and do a bit of shopping or seeing people, but basically I'm completely isolated. I've got these huge fields and loads of birds and squirrels and everything, and I see Lara and Hugo and beautiful little Tabitha every day, which is nice, which is wonderful. I'm watching her growing up, and she's going to be walking soon, I'm sure of that. Anyway, so my final music is one of the bands I've really grown to love. I'll call London Grammar, and here's a song from London Grammar, that wonderful singer. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you.
There you go. Well done, that's good. I mean, yeah, it's sort of hit and miss sometimes, but it's been good. Whew.
Well done.